Good evening, and thank you for joining us for the second half of Global Columbus. My name is Guadalupe Velasquez.
And I'm Soofe, with City of Columbus Community Relations Commission. We are continuing the second segment of our show tonight. We were talking about a famine in Somali, droughts that affected so many people in Somalia, especially southern Somalia. The second half of our show, I'll introduce you to our hosts, guests, I will say. Mohamed, also known as M2, is a student and also an activist from Ohio State University. Khadra Mohamed is the director of Somali Women Center of Somali Women's Advancement, and she is also those Somali community members who came first in City of Columbus. Mohamed Farah, also known as Mohamed 4.0, is a student, high school student, and has been here in Columbus for a little over nearly 10 years now.
Nearly 10 years, yeah.
And they're all very much community activists and community leaders, so thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having us.
And so we were discussing the famine in the Horn of Africa, and we know that a lot of you are doing work here on the ground to educate people about the atrocity. Who would like to, well, actually, first we want to hear a little bit about each of you before we go into talking about the famine. Please, Mohamed, please.
All right. My name is Mohamed Farah, as Abdi said. I'm a student. I go to Canal Winchester High School. I grew up in America, so when this famine hit, it was very personal to me because a lot of people were just throwing around the word Dadaab without the viewers knowing. Dadaab is the largest refugee camp in the world, and it's one of the oldest. And there's kids my age. I'm 18. There's kids older than me that have lived there their whole lives. So I mean, I'm gonna cop out to my own ignorance. I didn't know that. And when I heard that, it was like a call to action to me. So, and that's just about me.
Okay, I'm Khadra Mohamed. As you said, I'm the director of Center for Somali Women's Advancement. I am a social worker by training. I hold a master's in social work from Ohio State University. I'm glad to be here.
My name is Mohamed. I'm a recent graduate of Ohio State University. I've been here in Columbus for the last 12 years. What I try to do is work with different organizations here in Columbus. I try to work with my community because I feel like helping your community, you're helping yourself. So that's why I'm here.
And Mohamed, you take that to a whole nother level when you talk about your community. You're a perfect example of, because you work within the African community, but you also help internationally as well. Could you name some of the committees and boards that you serve on?
United Nations Association Columbus Chapter. I'm a board member at large. I used to intern there. There are great people there. And the last 3 years I've been volunteering with Columbus County World Affairs. It's a perfect place for young students to go there and volunteer their time.
Thank you.
Indeed. And for those of you who are just joining us and maybe unaware of the situation in Horn of Africa, there is a famine, a catastrophic famine going on in Somalia. A famine is declared during the summer, and 30,000 Somali children have died because of the famine. And our community leaders, I would like to thank in advance tonight. The second segment of our show will discuss the second part of our show, which will focus for the refugees and those who are fleeing from the famine, and also those who are displaced internally and have no houses and fled from one region to another and don't have an access to food or shelter. I would like to start with Mohamed, and we have an image first. Let me show the route of the refugees where they flee from the southern Somalia to the Dadaab refugee camps. As you can see, it's a long journey of over 600 miles, and people walk all the way from Bai or Mogadishu or suburbs of Shabelle to all the way northeastern Kenya. And on their route, a lot of people died or just left their children in nowhere. Mohamed, you talk about the numbers? What do you know about the route of the refugees to the Dadaab refugee camps?
First of all, the families are declared in July by the United Nations, but most families before that, they were leaving those regions because of insecurity, because of the conflict there. So some families had to travel like hundreds of miles. I think by September, about 5 regions in the south were declared as famine zones, and some of the districts there close to the capital, Mogadishu. So some families travel like hundreds of miles, where they lose kids in a way. I believe, like you said, the numbers before, close to 30,000 kids under age 5 have perished. That right there, you robbing the country of the future right there. So once they cross the border of Kenya and you go to Dadaab, where close to 500,000 Somalis are there, over 400,000 Somalis, and the place is too small for it. And whenever you have rain, so you have airborne diseases, things like that. So the problem is a lot.
Khadra, you have worked with women and children. That's a major focus in what you do professionally and personally. What is your opinion of what's going on and the atrocity that's happening to the women and the children in the Dadaab, but also in Somalia?
Yeah, there has been a catastrophic crisis in Somalia for a long time, and women and children are the most hit. And it's been estimated that 300,000, more than 300,000 were pregnant women affected by the drought and the famine. That's by the United Nations report from the Dadaab refugee camp, as was pointed out earlier. When first the famine was, before the famine was declared, people have been suffering long before that, and people started walking to find access to food, and that took hours, or the least, not hours actually, days, and sometimes up to a month to walk, and all those very sad situations happen along the way, where women have to leave their live children on the way because they couldn't make to walk up to the refugee camp, which was miles away. So definitely it's women and children who are the hardest hit, and it's being called now internationally, this famine is nicknamed the children's famine.
What's the main obstacle to the delivery of aid, either to the refugees or those fleeing, or even from their home to their homeland?
The first thing, I think infrastructure, that's the main thing. Because of the war the last 20 years, most of the small towns are inaccessible by water, by trucks and things like that. And when it rains, it floods the whole place. So number one thing is lack of infrastructure. And the second thing is security. There's a war going on most parts in the southern part of the country, some parts where some rebel organizations control some of these territories, so there's security. So some international organizations are afraid to go there right now because of that. So most of them are based in Kenya. Most organizations that work for Somalia are based in Kenya instead of being in there with the people.
And so what can be done? How do we know, who can we go to get assistance, to the people that in Somalia? So who do we know here in the United States? Because I know that you've been doing some work fundraising. What do you recommend?
The American Refugee Council is a great organization. Dr. Hawa Abdi Foundation, which is she's actually a doctor that's in Mogadishu. She's in a town called Abdikhayr, between Abdikhayr and which is a town just outside of Mogadishu. She's right there in between. She hasn't left. She's an educated woman. All the funds go directly to her, and American Refugee Council, Mohamed is a representative for them. They 100% of the proceeds go to them, so American Refugee Council and Dr. Hawa Abdi Foundation.
And how do we know that? Could you explain a little more in detail how they are working through that infrastructure?
for example, American Refugee Committee, which is based in Minnesota, have sent some of the local staff in Mogadishu, some of the hospitals there. They're working with the people. One of the main goals is just aid and relief, and I think in the near future they're going to talk about. I mean, they're going to work on what do you call integrating these people that are displaced. So they're there for long term. So that's one organization where you can help.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned this thing started, the famine started back in June, or was it July?
July.
Now, July has been a few months now. Is there a time to intervene? Do the aid agencies or those people who want to help have still time to intervene? Or if so, what is the easiest way other than those aid agencies, is there any other way to help those people?
There's a lot you can do. I mean, the famine started 5 months ago, but it's been there in the making for a long time. And so whatever you can do to help the people, raise awareness. I think there are other issues such as, for example, other disasters in the past, such as a tsunami or earthquake. You see the impact right away, but the famine is like long term. The people are there suffering, so you need to help them right away. There's a lot you can do. Raising awareness about this issue is the key.
And I think that that's been part of the problem as well, because it wasn't like one day something happened where everybody responds. And that's why it's so important to bring awareness to people in our community and worldwide, right?
Yeah, just to add on to what you're saying, the famine actually is a side effect of the drought. And the drought did not only affect the region we're talking about, South Somalia, it affected most of East Africa. And if we really want to help, we should look at the other places that were hit by the drought but aren't suffering as much as the south of Somalia is today. Because look at the northern part of Kenya, it had just as severe drought. The western parts of Ethiopia, the most crucial thing about this is the lack of governance in this region. So if we want to address the famine, I think we should be talking about the lack of government there. So we can't, a lot of times people ignore the fact that there is, like, what is causing this? What are we talking about here? You know, the famine is being made worse. Like, it does not need to be this bad. This is a man-made famine. It's the fact that the political situation there is just so hot. So,
Khadra.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I was just going to agree with this fine young man has been saying that this has been there for a long time. It could have been seen, it could have been at least preventive some of its worst effects. There has been an early warning system put in place, but that had detected early enough, but it hasn't been acted on early enough, and the massive scale that was needed to address this crisis was not put in place until it was a little bit too late, and it's not something that was unexpected given the crisis and the catastrophic issues in the Horn of Africa, especially Somalia and southern Somalia.
And so what are the things that you are doing here on the ground to send aid to people in Somalia?
Actually, I'm involved in SSA, which is Somali Student Association at Ohio State. They, in coalition with the USG at Ohio State, the undergraduate student government. My brother, actually, Zakaria Farah, and his friend Bilal Bajwa, they decided to make a 5K, 1 mile option, which is on November 13th. We have a website called projectrunforlife.org.
Just repeat that again.
Projectrunforlife.org. You can register. It's a 5K, which is about 3.3 miles. A 1 mile option, so you don't have to do or you can just donate. You don't have to necessarily run. But our goal is to raise $10,000. If you guys could help with that, that'd be great.
Indeed. Now, Khadra, you mentioned about the early warning system, and we little bit talked about that in the early show. The FuseNet and FSUNet, who this surveillance, who put it in place, and can you talk about a little bit more about that and who controls that surveillance?
I cannot necessarily say who controls who, but that was a system that was put in place to control the warning system. But the issue is not that whether it was there, who controls and who doesn't control, but the early warning system was effective enough to give out the warning, but it was not acted on.
So it was
the response was not there. It was the United Nations basically who is responsible for that through the local NGOs or international NGOs who are there in the ground. This have been long seen. This has been long predicted. I mean, for instance, a year ago, like last year, late October or early November, I was a participant in a conference that held in Nairobi, Kenya, sponsored by the European Union and involving the Somali women from Somalia and in the diaspora to be part of the Somali political process. But women who lived in Somalia, who were participants as well, were talking about the drought and the epidemic, the malnutrition, the starvation, and they were not interested in politics. As a matter of fact, they were early warning system themselves. They were saying it. They were talking about all this, and nobody was necessarily paying much attention as it was needed. It was a combination of international responsibility and the situation and the ground, such as the lack of governance, lack of security combined.
Mohamed?
I think early warning system works best if your country has all the political, social institutions intact. For a country like Somalia, all those things I mentioned are gone, so that system won't work. Like, you need years and years of, and Somalia imports most of its food.
Well, there is. Go
I'm
ahead,
sorry.
Mohamed.
If we're gonna talk about, it seems that we're talking about who's to blame, to me. But I think there's plenty of blame to go around. But I just want to point out the media. When there was a time where the famine was on TV every day, 600,000 lives were at stake, and what's his name? CNN was there on the ground. Anderson Cooper was in Mogadishu. But today, if you turn on CNN today, or Fox News, or any cable, it's not news. But so a lot of my friends ask me, is the famine over, or what's the deal with that? So I think if we're going to talk like who's responsible, I think we need to hold the media responsible. The fact that, it's yesterday's news. It's not. It's still going on today. And I would really like to see the media take a turnaround around that.
And so what do you think in a positive way then, what can you do and what can you encourage people to do in a positive way to bring attention and light to this?
In my day-to-day life, like I try to mention my friends, so this is just me. Just talk to your friends about it. A lot of my friends didn't know. A lot of my friends since they heard I'm doing Project Run for Life, they have signed up. So it's just about advocating, becoming an advocate. Like not necessarily I'm Somali, but that's how I came into this. But maybe my friend hears about this and they decide to do some action on their own. So, yeah.
I'll just add that the crisis and the famine, it's news itself, as a news itself, it might not be on the screens, national screens or international television screens, but the issue is still ongoing and going for many people. As he said, it's more of personal, and it depends on how you came about. It doesn't matter. He's a Somali. That's how he knew about it, and his friends now find out from him or from the media. So I think the effort is still ongoing. I know, and I'm aware of a lot of Somalian women in particular who are still working and made this in their lives, and who are always in the constant move in helping those in need. They have been collecting money donations throughout the whole city, and they are in a form of money, in a form of clothing, and there's ongoing effort. And I'm actually very proud how people were responsive of this. And there are a lot of people from the general American public who are moved by the atrocity of this situation, who are still also working alongside with the Somali people who it might be for personal reason, but the effort is still going on. But I agree with him that the television screens, they move on with the next news.
Yeah. But the Somali people, other than blaming anyone, but the matter of responsibility, because when we're talking about over 3,000 children dying, it's the whole generation, as my co-host Guadalupe put it earlier, is at risk. And the authority, there is a transitional federal government in place. I heard some progress. Were you following any effort from the Somali people in Somalia, doing any action or intervention to resolve the problem?
Are you talking about the Somali Somali people,
government, yes.
Somali government? I mean, I think it's well known that Somalia didn't have a functioning government for so many years. Now there's what's called a transitional federal government, which is very fragile, and it is internationally supported, but however it's been very ineffective due to the crisis and on what's going on in there. And I think they have been doing some kind of effort to help the situation, but they have all obstacles and all challenges to meet their responsibility. But it is the international community. The international community must be held accountable of the continuing of the starvation. And everybody associates Somalia with Al-Shabaab and piracy, and that should not push back the effort. Transitional government is not strong enough to meet the challenges that it needs to take to help those people in need.
And so we only have about 2 minutes left on the show. Unfortunately, the time has gone very quickly, and we'd like to thank you very much for being on the show. And if maybe just your final, if you could just repeat once again that. Oh, I understand we have a caller. So we have a caller on the line. A caller, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Thank you for calling. What is your question, or what would you like to add?
Well, I'm very much interested in the Somali women's movement, and I wanted to know if it was open to other groups, other women, or is it just limited to the Somali women? Because I'm interested in helping.
Okay, thank you very much. Khadra, would you like to answer that?
Good question.
I will. That's very good to hear. Thank you very much and for interesting and helping the women in need, or who are necessarily not living by you, but the other side of the world. The Somali women's effort and the movement, it's always open for support from other women and other fellow American and Ohioan women. So you're certainly very welcome, and please spread the word. Center for Somali Women's Advancement. I can be reached at Khadra Shire at hotmail.com, and I will leave that with the studio so that can be shared. Please feel free to contact any Somalian woman you encounter with to ask her how you can help. And I am very delighted that you are willing to support the Somali women in need. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you, Khadra, and thank you all for joining us on the show. We'd like to ask you to come back again. And we do have a few announcements to make as we wrap up Global Columbus today.
Indeed. Please make sure to join us on Community Relations Commission, City of Columbus Community Relations Commission on the celebration of Martin Luther King Day starting January 2012. On January 15th, we have an art contest exhibit and Martin Luther King Radical Contest on January 15th and the March program on 17th.
And remember that 2012 is our bicentennial, so we will really be kicking off the 200-year anniversary of Columbus with our Martin Luther King March and celebration. We ask you to join us at CRC Facebook so you can find out more about what's going on in Columbus with our global community.
Indeed, and absolutely. I also wanted to add that the historical civil rights tour on the April 10th through 14th.
And we'll talk about that more as we follow through next year. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a good night.